So this DeSantis stuff. What is there to say about it? I kind of think the wheels are coming off. Um, we were just talking about Nazis and um, fascists and all that. I should say something about this Nate Hochman stuff, which we're at most part of the dispatch, I think, ignoring because I don't. I think it's funny how, like, I don't. For those of you, okay, so what happened was Nate Hochman, who had interned at the dispatch, then became a National Review writer. We did a piece at the Dispatch by Alec Dent, who's no longer at the Dispatch. He's now at the Messenger. But we did a piece about this weird club that a lot of these new right kids in Washington belong to and or go to and have debates and whatnot. And then in the course of everything, we learned that Nate had done this, Twitter Spaces audio thing with Nick Fuentes, the neo-Nazi piece of garbage, and was inappropriately and indefensibly deferential and complimentary of him. And Nate's explanation, which I credited to some extent at the time, was that he was just trying to get Fuentes to open up and all these kinds of things and be more conversational, which I credit him to that. I think that's part of the explanation. I don't think it was really an excuse. And anyway, the whole thing blew up. We got attacked by a lot of people. My friend Michael Brennan Doherty was very, very angry at us. This Matthew Peterson guy, someone sent me this tweet storm by this guy. I think his name is Matthew Peterson. Apparently he's was the executive editor of The Blaze. As you can tell, he doesn't have a huge radar presence for me. Went on this tear about how the only reason the Dispatch would do this is because Nate Hochman is so much more relevant than, it's a 22-year-old kid at the time, 23-year-old kid. So much more relevant than all, me and David French and Steve Hayes and Sarah Isger and blah, 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 blah. And that he's he's the future and we're the past and we don't matter. And he's declaring war on us and blah, 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 blah. And this is outrageous and yada, yada, yada. And it was all nonsense. We stood by the piece. Anyway, this all comes back to me now because Nate did these videos, or he helped do these videos, or he disseminated these videos because he left National Review to go work for the DeSantis campaign. And one of these videos had this Nazi symbolism of the Sonorand, and it shows DeSantis in front of, sort of looking like a leader a military leader who's going to bring the order and discipline and Gemeinschaft of Florida to the nation. And this came out on the heels of that idiotic anti-LGBTQ video. And Nate has been telling people, apparently, I saw Roger Ayers saying this, that he had no idea that this Sonorand thing, I think that's how you pronounce it, was a Nazi image. Now, let me put it this way. I'm skeptical that he's telling the truth there, but I'm willing to entertain the idea that he's telling the truth there. I just don't really understand how that is a great excuse. Kind of reminds me, I was talking about this with some friends over text and Slack and stuff. A lot of you probably don't remember this, but there was this writer for the New Republic back in the day, Ruth Shalit, who was like the hot thing, up and coming, the next Maureen Dowd, blah, 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 blah. And she got caught plagiarizing. And, it was like 2 examples, 3 examples. She ripped off David Broder. And I remember at the time, everyone joking, like, who rips off David Broder? Which is to say that David Broder was a decent and honorable guy, but not a scintillating prose stylist. and not someone you should plagiarize, in part because he was so widely read in Washington that someone was going to notice. Anyway, I haven't gone back and visited all the details, so if I'm misremembering something, I apologize. She got busted. She apologized. She got reprimanded or put on leave or something from the New Republic, and blah, 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 blah. And then she did it again. And she did it again. And she did it again. And each time she claimed it was a mistake and, getting used to how do you cut and paste and all this kind of stuff. And on the one hand, I always found it so hard to believe that she was lying, because what does she benefit from plagiarizing? I mean, and getting caught or whatever. At the same time, it doesn't matter if it's an accident, right? I mean, if you get busted for plagiarism, even if it's by accident, and I do believe it can happen by accident, I mean, I have enough wayward cut and paste sentences here and there after writing 3 books and 5 million words of columns and blog posts and whatnot. I live in mild terror of, making those kinds of mistakes, but I can totally see how it would happen. And I don't think it should be the death sentence that some people often conveniently claim. But it's bad, right? The thing is, if you got caught for it and really embarrassed for it once, you should try really, really hard not to have it happen again. And to have it happen several times to the point where truly your career is being, destroyed, then there's just no excuse, right? I mean, and similarly, if I got caught sort of foolishly playing footsie with a neo-Nazi, and hanging out with a crowd of these, a lot of these weird Claremont fellow guys who are all sort of Fuentes adjacent, and and the Pedro and Gonzalez guy. If I were acquiring the stink of being sort of soft on bigots and neo-Nazis, even if it was unfair, I'd be super careful not to fuel that narrative any further. And then you add in the fact that Nate was working for a presidential campaign that basically was this, lifeline for him in some ways. And he goes and just doesn't check to see where this image comes from. I mean, this is his claim, apparently. It's such gross negligence that I don't, again, I'm not sure I believe him. But even if I do believe him, I don't understand why that would be. It just shows that you are so unconcerned or so cavalier with these sorts of topics that you don't think it's worth going a little further to make sure that you don't do something like this. I think that kind of indifference as a defense is pretty damning too, but who cares? It just doesn't matter that much. I wish Hochman the best. I think he has been making some really poor choices for a while now. They are consistent with a long history of people on the right thinking that they are the ones who can sort of thread this needle and talk about these taboo things in ways that will only redound to their benefit. Like carry the brazier, the what do you call it? The lantern of the forbidden flame, and they carry it on their head and they say, "See, I can do this," and then 10 minutes later they're self-immolating themselves with it. And he's so young and he's talented and smart. I hope he figures out how to sort of pull out of all this stuff. I think the rallying around the kid is weird. It tells you something interesting about various things on the right. But anyway, I think the real relevance of this, and I'm sorry I went on so long about that. I haven't talked about this kind of stuff in a while. The real relevance is about the DeSantis campaign. I mean, of course, they let Nate go. They were letting other people go because the DeSantis campaign has got this massive burn rate, and has a lot of overhead. They're doing, I mean, I haven't studied the latest polls. I saw he's down in New Hampshire. He's down in South Carolina. Our own Nick Cotogio had this piece before I left about how he was, depending on the polling you're looking at, slightly down, like 3 points down from when he entered the race. And you got to remember, if you go back to back then, everyone, when DeSantis was sort of moldering a bit in the polls before he got in the race, the DeSantis people rightly and fairly said, look, he's not even a declared candidate yet. Wait for him to get in the race. Then you see what happens. Well, he got in the race. We've seen what happens. It hasn't been too impressive. I increasingly think that, there's almost no chance he gets the nomination. Like, I don't know. I'm no longer confident that, and I'm also no longer confident that he could beat Biden in the way that I once was. I still think he probably could. But it's been a bad campaign. And I think it's been a bad campaign because they're bought into a weird theory, and DeSantis is not enough of a normal politician to read the room. I mean, remember all that stuff about how people said DeSantis can't read the room. I was one of the ones saying it because people who had interacted a lot with DeSantis said it to me that, there was this, like, is he on the spectrum? And he has very low EQ and he's not a glad-hander. And I was very sympathetic to sort of the Charlie Cook defense at the time about that, which is, I'm not sure that some of these things, that he doesn't like to hang out with donors, he'd rather be home with his family. I'm not sure that's as damning as people think it is, right? That he's not comfortable schmoozing people at cocktail parties. I get that. And I think a lot of Americans could get that. And it's certainly not a moral failing. It might be a political failing, right? Just in terms of what you need to do the job. But I'm starting to think that, like, to the extent that stuff is true, it helps explain that DeSantis gets a theory about what he needs to do to win, and he executes, right? It's like decide, commit, execute, right? Or whatever those management types talk about. And or decide, commit, execute, succeed. And which would make sense for a guy who was a military guy and a lawyer and all that kind of stuff. The problem is that their theory of the race just looks wrong. They think that the voters that he needs to rally first are the most committed pro-Trump voters, and then he can scoop up everybody else afterwards. And I could see why, if you're looking at this stuff on paper a year ago, that would make some sense. I mean, obviously Trump had the biggest hold over the most voters, and you need those voters. And, you secure the quote unquote Trump base, and then you can move outward to collect other voters. The problem with that theory is that I think it would be the absolute correct theory if Trump weren't in the race, but he's in the race. And so you're not really stealing the core Trump voters, because the core Trump voters, by definition, are going with Trump. And meanwhile, the theory about what he needed to do that was predicated on this very online, we will win the battle through memes kind of thinking. And it was, I think DeSantis has made a smart decision to recalibrate his strategy about not doing mainstream media interviews. That was this idea that you're only going to win by doing, fever swampy or friendly media interviews, when we live in an age where being attacked by the mainstream media is like the best thing that can happen to a Republican politician, just seems really, really a weird choice. And so I think it's smart for them to change it. I just think it may be too late. And then you look at, like, the specifics of this stuff. I mean, he talks about the fringy, what I think is mostly jackass wing of the sort of MAGA base, as if they are the one voters he really just can't cross. And this thing about the RFK, he didn't say that he was going to put RFK as the head of the FDA or the CDC. But as Nick points out, it's like, it's not at all clear what else he could have meant when he said he was asked by that Clay Travis guy, would you make him your running mate? And he said, no, And I thought his answer on that was pretty good. But then he, goes on to say, now I'm pretty good on COVID, and I might have him, I might use him to sick him on the FDA or the CDC. And, what does sick him on those agencies mean if not running them? Does it mean he's like some sort of Inspector Javert who gets to go over the health establishment and public health establishment in the federal government? I don't know that there's any defense of the actual substance of what DeSantis was saying there, because Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is a demented, lying crackpot. And this bizarre effort to just take him at his word when he just makes stuff up, or is so bad at reading scientific studies that his misinterpretations he doesn't check with any serious person, and just puts out there, Ashkenazi Jews, COVID was designed to not infect Ashkenazi Jews. I don't think he's an anti-Semite. I think he's an idiot. I think he's a profound idiot.